everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by IRI Consultants. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit IRI at iriconsultants.com. I am Jennifer Oraquad, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. In what has become an increasingly insecure world, trust has become even more critical to the success of our organizations. Trust is what binds employees to employers and customers to companies, and while much lip service is given to the concept of trust, it's high time that we become intentional about what we can do to build trust in our relationships, the ones that matter the most, our relationships with our workforce, our customers, and our partners. Today, I'm pleased to welcome two guests to Project HR, Ashley Reichheld, a principal at Deloitte Digital, and Amelia Dunlop, Chief Experience Officer at Deloitte Digital. Ashley and Amelia are the co-authors of a new book titled The 4 Factors of Trust: How Organizations Can Earn Lifelong Loyalty. They're joining us today to help us better measure, predict, and grow trust in our companies. Ashley, Amelia, thanks so much for joining me here today on Project HR.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having us.
having us.
So I want to start right off in the introduction of your book, where you say the quiet part out loud, that trust is at an all-time low. Is that trust in companies or just trust in everything? And what's gotten us here?
I think, unfortunately, it's trust in many things. Some organizations like Pew and Gallup have been measuring trust for the past 40 years, and it has consistently been on the decline for organized religion, for Congress, for big business, for schools, for media. When we started studying trust, we also asked people during the pandemic, do you trust others to social distance? And the resounding answer was no. So we are at a point of very low trust that we have to work our way back from.
Makes sense. What do we lose as humans and as organizations when we lose that trust?
Oh my goodness. I think we lose just about everything, right? Trust is, the path to loyalty. Trust is kind of the driver of so much of our behavior. I mean, we know that when customers trust us, 90% of them are likely to buy from us again, and 60% almost exclusively from us. And we also know from our workforce side that when we're trusted by our employees, that 80% of them are more motivated to work. And so I feel like we lose all of that when we lose trust.
So that leads me to ask you about a leadership team that you were both a part of that set an aspiration to elevate the human experience. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how it led you to examine trust?
Absolutely. So about 4 years ago, Ashley and I were both part of this leadership team, and we knew that we wanted to do something that was broader than customers or workforce or even partners. Because when you wake up in the morning, you don't wake up as a customer, and none of us wake up as employees. So we set this aspiration to elevate the human experience. And then over the last couple of years, we've just tried to kind of make that mean something for our teams and also for the organizations we work with. And then we realized you fundamentally can't elevate anyone's experience if they don't trust you. And that's what led to the research and ultimately writing this book together on the 4 factors of trust.
Interesting. And both of you came to this topic kind of naturally. Ashley, as a result of your lineage, and Amelia, by way of your previous book. Ashley, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you here?
Sure. Well, I grew up on a Christmas tree farm, coming from a family of teachers. And one of the things that my parents thought was really, really important for us was to learn how to run a business. So when I was 16, I ran my own Christmas tree farm. And because I couldn't be there all day since I was at school, we ran it on the honor system, which meant that we had to trust that people would put their money through the door and take the tree that was signed to the tag and so on and so forth. And you know what? The entire time I ran it, we didn't have a single person steal a tree. So trust and loyalty really are part of our family for a long time. And of course, my uncle, Fred Reichheld, has written the book on loyalty. He's created a measurement system called the Net Promoter System, which is used by most companies today to understand loyalty.
And Amelia, what about you? What experiences led you to this point?
So I think in my college class, I would have been voted the least likely to end up in the world of business because right after graduation, I actually went and got a degree in moral theology. And so I like to think of myself as one of the very few strategy theologians out there. But yeah, my academic background is really in sociology and theology. And so questions of meaning, of purpose have always been really important to me. And so that's part of what's kind of brought me to this topic of what does it mean to elevate the human experience and build trust in our organizations.
And so people would think of this, trust as sort of a nebulous topic. So I want to learn about the very extensive methodology that you guys came up with, your research. What went into writing this book?
Well, luckily, a lot of research had been done already. I mean, there were some 40 plus years of research on the topic of trust. So we started there. We did a lot of desk research to understand what drove trust. And then when we thought we had a handle on it, we tested those factors in market with both customers and employees. Then, when we thought we had the science just right in terms of predicting behavior, we tested with the company to make sure that it was really easy to use, that it was simple and actionable, and that at a glance you could tell what you needed to do. Then we said, okay, that's not enough. We want this to be a really deep understanding of trust. So we went out and surveyed 200,000 plus respondents over 25 sectors, over all different kinds of venues, to make sure we could answer questions like, so what are the characteristics of a trusted company, and what can we learn from the companies who aren't trusted? And then finally, we paired that with financial information to understand the value of trust. We really wanted to make sure that this wasn't just another set of questions you could ask your customers that would fade away over time. We wanted to be confident that it was very predictive of behavior. And as a result, that's how we identified the 4 factors of trust.
All right, Amelia, Ashley, I'm going to take a quick sponsorship break right now, but when we all return, I'd love for you to detail the 4 factors of trust and discuss how we can all start building trust within our organizations. Stay with us.
Organizational development is getting a lot of attention, and for good reason. Your organization is faced with continuous and pervasive change. And while your leaders have inevitably dealt with change throughout their careers, there is a difference today. Changes used to have life cycles, making change management easier because there was a beginning and an end. That's not true today. Many companies are stumbling from one disruption to another as their managers and supervisors try to meet this flow of challenges. At IRI Consultants, we work to identify how your systems, departments, and functional areas work together and where the problems exist. A roadmap for change from IRI will concentrate on aligning your strategy, processes, and people to optimize organizational effectiveness. We expect that the business environment will remain in a state of disruption for many years. An IRI organizational development consultant will ensure your organization is prepared to manage continuous change as the key to sustainability. Schedule a call today at iriconsultants.com.
I'm back now with Ashley Reichheld and Amelia Dunlop, authors of a new book titled The 4 Factors of Trust: How Organizations Can Earn Lifelong Loyalty. So let's start out with, why is trust so difficult to measure?
Well, trust is really messy and human. It's a relationship and a feeling. We actually run an exercise where we'll hand out 10 pieces of paper to 10 executives sitting in a room and say, write down the definition of trust. And inevitably, those 10 definitions come back and they're all different. One will say trust is when you keep your promises. Another will say trust is when you show up. Another one will have a blank piece of paper and say, oh, I know it when I see it, but I just couldn't write it down. Then we'll say, okay, now everybody write down the definition of reliability. And 10 out of 10 pieces of paper will come back with a reasonably similar definition of reliability. The moral of the story being that trust is really difficult for humans to describe. Do you trust me? Trust me to what? But people are really good at telling you what builds their trust or what erodes their trust, hence those 4 factors.
All right, so let's talk about the 4 factors of trust. What are they?
Sure. So we like to think that the definition of trust is about making good promises and keeping them. When you make a good promise, that's your intent, and you demonstrate your intent through showing up with humanity, right? Kindness and treating people fairly, your transparency, being very clear. And when you keep your promise, you demonstrate your competence and the extent to which you're both capable of delivering on that promise and reliably going to do that over time. So these are the 4 factors: your humanity, your transparency, your capability, and your reliability. And together, we like to think that these are the predictors of 74% of human behavior going forward.
So let's break those 4 factors down. Let's talk about each one of them in turn.
Well, so humanity is when a company demonstrates empathy and kindness and treats everyone fairly. And humanity is directly linked to what people do. So, for example, when a company or a brand has a high degree of humanity, those customers are almost 300% more likely to stick with the brand through a mistake. And that's not just academic. We're seeing this in real life. We've been working with an airline, for example, and man, airlines had a difficult summer, a lot of delays.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at airline passengers who trusted the airline already and had a delay, there was no impact to their score. They, looked at it and said, you know what, that happens. It's an airline. Sometimes there's weather. However, for the people who didn't trust the airline to begin with, they suffered from a negative 25% drop in their scores. You can imagine they're sitting there going, did your career time out? Did you give my plane to somebody? A great degree of skepticism driving what's behind that delay.
Yeah, and I can jump in and talk about transparency. Transparency is one of the factors that really distinguishes what we call in our book the trust winners, because it is the ability to kind of be clear and what we call kind of relevant transparency, whether that's with your workforce or with your customers. And like the example we like to give is when we think about the sort of the farm to table movement and ethically sourced kind of and meats, we don't actually want to know in that description of your beautiful meal at the restaurant how your kind of the meat that's served on your plate was slaughtered that day.
Right.
But you want to know the kind of relevant transparency for
Hmm.
kind of what went into the kind of the farmer and the labor that it took to produce your meal.
Hmm.
And the last two factors are capability and reliability. Capability being, do you have the ability? Can you create quality products and experiences on the employee side? Does your employer create a good work experience? And reliability means just doing it consistently over and over and over again. And these two are really table stakes for any organization. Using that theme of restaurants, you're not going to go to a restaurant when you don't want to eat the food or where you're worried about it giving you food poisoning. Those are table stakes. You need to make sure that those things are there already. And then how you really differentiate yourself is using the other two. But they also, incidentally, are big drivers of behavior. Take capability as an example. When a brand is considered capable, customers are almost 300% more likely to choose that brand over the competition. And from an employee perspective, when an employee views their employer as capable, they are 50% less likely to look for another job.
Hmm. So the impact of these individual factors can vary in importance depending on the nature of the work that an organization does. Is that true?
That is such an excellent question. We do see them vary depending. So, for example, in healthcare, where it's literally life and death, it's important for that company or that physician or that nurse or whomever you're working with to treat you with compassion and humanity. It is about you after all. So it's mandatory, if you will. Whereas in an industry like automotive, which is a little bit different, you really want a car that's going to get you from home to school drop off safely. So you tend to be more reliant on capability and reliability. But the companies that do the best job, the most trusted companies, really do outperform on every factor.
So once identified, these four factors enable us to build a new way to actually measure trust. So can you tell us about HX Trust ID?
The HX Trust ID is based on those four factors, and it is just four questions. And it's meant to be super simple so that companies can look at it. And when they get their scores back, it says, oh, I'm low on humanity. I need to go do these three things in order to build this person's trust. So designed to be both meaningful and because it predicts behavior, but also actionable, really easy for companies to use. And importantly, we don't just stop there. I know Amelia and I talk all the time about the importance of prediction.
Ashley, I was going to ask just kind of a little bit of a tangent here, but being in marketing myself, your uncle created NPS, the Net Promoter Scores. What is HX Trust ID's relationship to NPS?
They are directly correlated. So as you earn trust, you earn loyalty. As you lose trust, you lose loyalty. We like to say that we think trust is the path to loyalty and loyalty is our ultimate destination. But what's really interesting about it is it can be hard to know what to do. If you have an NPS score of 62, for example, what do you do? Well, that's where trust can help because trust helps you understand what actions to take. Using our airlines example as an example, passenger A and passenger B have identical NPS scores, but passenger A is low on humanity. So if the airline wants to earn her trust, then they need to treat her like a human. Don't yell at her to get out of the aisle. If she's not sitting by her child, do your best to make sure she can be. Passenger B, same NPS score, but this time low on reliability. And while you can and should treat him or her as a human being, it's more important to emphasize that you're very sorry it was late, to make it up to them and to talk about why it's not going to happen again. So, same NPS score, but very different actions in order to build that trust and loyalty.
Yeah, and we think it's so important because we know that most sort of executives and Fortune 500s are using some measure of the Net Promoter Score, and many even have their own compensation tied to it. So, what we're excited about with the HX Trust ID is it helps to predict, and as well as I actually just described, drive behaviors that are likely going to kind of grow your Net Promoter Scores.
And I love that factor because so many people are already familiar with NPS and how that works that this being sort of an extension of that, I think makes this system entirely relatable and actionable.
Yep, we like to say the trust is in the Reichheld family.
There you go. There you go. All right, Amelia, Ashley, it's time for another quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guests today are Ashley Reichheld and Amelia Dunlop, authors of a new book titled The 4 Factors of Trust: How Organizations Can Earn Lifelong Loyalty. We are back, and I love the fact that the book addresses both building trust as an individual and as a company. So how do we go about building trust in our own lives and in our own workplaces? What's the process here?
Well, I think one of the things we like to talk about is Ashley and I kind of have spent so much time on this topic of the human experience and building trust because as leaders, we needed it. We wanted something that we could use to actually build trust and elevate the experience of our own teams. And so we like to think that we've built this and we've kind of shared this with the world for other leaders like ourselves. And that yes, we need to take the time to kind of measure and predict and act on trust, but also as individuals, we can start today by asking ourselves, are we demonstrating capability and reliability? Are we showing up with humanity and transparency? And we don't need to wait for anyone else in our organization before we can start doing that as leaders ourselves.
I also found it fascinating that you put your own company, Deloitte, to the test with HX Trust ID. What were the outcomes there?
Well, we like to think that we drink our own champagne, as we say.
Sure.
And it was just really important to us that this is something that we believe in so strongly that we would use it ourselves as leaders and we would use it with our own teams. And so that's why we've also been using it to kind of measure trust and the experience with our employees here at Deloitte.
And the last half of the book largely focuses on 6 operational areas in a company that are typically associated with driving company growth and the role that building trust plays in that. So, HR is one of those areas. So, I wanted to know, what trust challenges do we face in HR and how can HR help build trust for the organization?
HR plays an absolutely critical role in building trust because trust in and of itself is an ecosystem. If we are able to build trust with our employees, those employees help us to build trust with customers. And when we have customer trust, we know that the most trusted companies outperform everybody else by up to 400%. So, starting with workforce trust is incredibly important. It's not easy, though. I mean, today there's a scramble for talent. We're starting from a place of low worker trust. We're living in a new hybrid environment where there's a lot of uncertainty about how to engage, how productive we are. So it's a difficult place to build trust, but it's critically important.
Well, I think the other thing that we know about trust in the workplace is when we think about the different demographics. So, for example, one that we care a great deal about is kind of women in the workplace. And we know there's a lot of research that's been done on that. But what we learned was that women start out trusting in the workplace as much or more than men when they're kind of new to the workplace. But as they progress in their careers over time, they consistently lose trust by up to 14 points until or unless they enter the C-suite. And so that we found that to be really interesting because we recognize that the workplace is such an important reason to kind of build trust. As Ashley just talked about, it's directly linked to the ecosystem of building trust with your customers and the outcomes you're looking for. But we realize that there's a gap when it comes to building trust with women in particular.
And the hard part is a lot of companies, in their efforts to get it right, are actually doing things that might accidentally erode trust. For example, a lot of organizations right now are thinking heavily about productivity and measuring productivity, but that sends the message to employees or workers, hey, I don't trust that you're doing what you're supposed to do, so I'm going to make sure I measure it just to make sure. And what we like to tell people is, oh, you're measuring the wrong thing. If you were able to measure trust, you're actually measuring motivation. We know that when employees trust us, they're motivated to work. And organizations need to demonstrate trust, give trust in order to get trust.
And so you highlight some organizations that are doing trust right in the book. I would love for you to share an example or two of that.
Well, the most trusted in our research fall into 3 categories. We have competence leaders, and those are companies that over deliver on kind of capability and reliability. Think about Energizer as an example. I mean, think about the bunny.
Mm-hmm.
The bunny is literally the motto of
Right.
capability. Then there are leaders that we call humanity leaders. And these are those that over index on that notion of taking care of you, treating you as an individual, empathy and kindness. And a good example of that would be the Cleveland Clinic, where they've set everything up to be very patient friendly and patient centric. And then you have the trust winners, and they outperform everybody on all 4. A really good example of that would be Marriott. And I think Amelia said this earlier in the interview, but Transparency tends to be the secret sauce. We see a lot of companies that are high in capability and reliability. We see some companies high in humanity, but not nearly as many are high on transparency, in part, I think, because we don't value it. But from a trust perspective, we earn trust in moments of vulnerability. When I make myself vulnerable to you, I'm in the process of trying to earn your trust. Now, it's hard for organizations to do that. The street doesn't really like vulnerability, for example. So the way we argue that companies do that is through transparency, by sharing information that might expose them, but which is really important for you to make your choice.
And I think picking up on the vulnerability point, it is one that I think we're hearing a lot about what it means to be vulnerable as individuals, as leaders. We talked with a number of CEOs and what it means for them to be vulnerable as well. And we think it's one of those things that's becoming a differentiator for what we call the trust winners, because when they do it really well, it demonstrates an authenticity that's really hard to fake.
So, if our listeners want to find out more about you or your book, where should they go?
They should go to the4factors.com.
The 4factorsoftrust.com.
Ah.
And I would add, we actually designed HX Trust Data to be open source. So there you will find not just our research, you can play with the data and look at where trust varies by sector, by demographic, by ethnicity, what happens to behavior. You can also download the survey so you can use it yourself.
Excellent. I want to let everybody know that those links, including a link to purchase the 4 Factors of Trust, will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to unlock that today at iriconsultants.com/podcast. Right now, though, Amelia, Ashley, it is time for our lightning round questions. These are questions I like to ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
Ready.
As we will ever be.
All right, there we go. So our first question is always a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about building and measuring trust. So in your opinion, and this is for both of you, which of these fictional characters is more trustworthy? Sesame Street's Bert or Ernie?
Well, that takes me back. It's been a long time since I've seen Sesame Street, but I do remember that Bert is kind of the wild card and Ernie's the more responsible one, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Although Bert is, maybe a little bit more honest. On our 4-factor scale, Amelia, what do you think? Where did you put them?
I mean, I don't know, Ashley. I mean, you have younger kids than I do, so I think it's been even longer since I have had a chance to watch Sesame Street. And I think I would maybe take it in a different direction and just say that I don't like to think about it as measuring an individual's kind of trust score, so to speak. It's more about sort of demonstrating kind of their actions. And as you said, they're fictional characters, so I might not sort of assess them on the kind of the 4 factors of trust.
Very good. All right, I want to ask each of you in turn, what is the best book you've read recently? Amelia, you first.
Oh, that's easy. My husband is a novelist. I'm a big fan of his work. So I would say it's The Bear by Andrew Krubeck.
Very good. Ashley?
I am reading a book called Dinners with Ruth, and it is a book by Nina Totenberg. And it is a memoir of their relationship and the many, many dinners they had as friends. Very heartwarming, very cool book.
Yeah, sounds really good. All right, next question. What is your favorite thing about the work that you do? And Amelia, if you want to go first.
Oh my goodness, the favorite thing?
What is your favorite thing about the work that you do?
I mean, I love that we get to show up every day and talk about what it means to elevate the human experience, what it means to build trust. And as Ashley and I like to think about the fact that we do this work together because it creates the kinds of organizations we want to be a part of and the kind of world we want to live in. And so that we get to use our time and our talents to be able to do that. It's absolutely a dream job.
Ashley, what about you? What's your
100%. If we are able to help organizations build trust, then I believe we're going to make this place a world we all want to live in and organizations that we all want to be a part of.
All right. So Ashley, continuing on, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I really didn't understand this at the time, but I had a client over lunch sit me down and say, Ashley, we love you. You're great at all these things. But the one piece of advice I can give you is that you have to make yourself vulnerable. Now, I work in an environment with a lot of men, fewer men now than before, and I had a hard time understanding that, but now I get it. What she was really saying is you want to show people who you are. You want to be authentic, and you want to give them a chance to get to know you, the good and bad, the ugly, the things that you're good at, the things that you're bad at. Make yourself human.
Very nice. Amelia, what about you? What's the best advice you've ever been given?
So I like to think about it as the 10% rule, which is, we all lead very fast-paced lives. We're Ashley and I are both kind of mothers as well as partners in kind of management consulting practice. And I think that a lot of times when people start to feel like they're kind of burnt out or they just need to kind of chuck it all and become kind of goat farmers, it's about dialing back 10%, not necessarily making a 180-degree change. And so before you think about like chucking it all, what can we do to kind of reclaim that 10%, which is literally 6 minutes every hour or 2.5 hours every day, to make sure that you're actually giving back to yourself first so that you're not always operating from your edge.
That is excellent advice. All right, last question for each of you. Who or what inspires you?
Well, my role model is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the notorious RBG, hence the book.
Yep.
She inspires me in so many ways, including her long fight for women's rights, including her long personal fights, and the fact that she might be just the feistiest person I've ever read about.
I love that.
So good, Ashley. I love that too.
Yep.
I think I'm going to go in the opposite direction and say that I'm inspired by my daughter, who is now 12. And I think there's something about seeing the world through her eyes that has always inspired me. And it's, there's the having a different perspective, there's challenging, there's asking why. And I also think about the fact that everything we're trying to do is to make the world a better place for the younger generation. So I am inspired to keep doing that.
Those are both beautiful sources of inspiration for sure. Ashley, Amelia, thank you so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. It was a lot of fun.
I also want to thank our listeners. Don't forget that we listened back to this episode and took great notes for you. You can grab those notes for free at iriconsultants.com/podcast. If you're ready for your Project HR debut, our team is always looking for outstanding guests. Let us know about your expertise at projecthr@iriconsultants.com. Don't forget to subscribe to Project HR. A new episode posts every Thursday. Finally, drop me a line, leave us a review, or give the show a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's all for this week's episode of Project HR. Let's make it a great day at work.